and we are just getting started with the joint meeting of the Planning and Zoning Committee and Transportation and Infrastructure Committee. I'll do a roll for planning and turn it over to Chair Parker for transportation. And we have myself present, Councilmember Allen present, Councilmember Benedict, Councilmember Clay, Councilmember Horton, Councilmember Parker, and Councilmember Bowe and Vice Chair Rutherford present. Thank you all for being here.
Thank you, Chair. And for Transportation and Infrastructure, we've got Chair Parker, Councilmember Allen, Councilmember Benedict, Councilmember Cash, Councilmember Ellis, Councilmember Evans Siegel, Councilmember Hill, Vice Chair Horton, and Councilmember Spain present. Did I miss any members of the Transportation and Infrastructure Committee that are present? Looks like I didn't. So we've got a great attendance here. Thanks, everybody.
Awesome. Thank you. I'll turn it over to planning staff, let you all introduce yourselves and get started.
Thank you, Chair. Good afternoon, Council members. Greg Claxton with the Planning Department. I'm here with Lisa Milligan, Katie Camizas, Rochelle Albright, and Brett Withers from the Planning Department. We are presenting an update on the Housing and Infrastructure Study. We issued a memo to the Commission and posted it to our website with recommendations for changes to the Metro Zoning Code. I'm going to walk through that memo for y'all this evening. You'll see that we've labeled this Phase 2. One of the things we try to do in this memo is bring a little bit more clarity and order to kind of how this process has worked to date and how we foresee it moving ahead into the future. And so I'm going to kind of go through that process and then walk through a reminder of what we've heard so far, what our findings are so far, what our recommendations are going forward. Phase 1 was when our department, working with other Metro departments, assessed Metro's zoning code and infrastructure systems for their impacts on Nashville's housing supply, affordability, and equity. We did a round of community engagement through community conversations throughout the county in March 2025 and spoke with you when we released our initial findings and preliminary recommendations report. This phase, what we're calling Phase 2, is focused on updating the text of Metro's zoning code. Broadly, the goals of this is to improve the character of new development, to create greater certainty for neighbors and builders, and to create new districts for smaller scale housing options. We've based this on the last couple of months of workshops and briefing the Commission through work sessions, and then issuing the draft recommendations memo. We'll have next steps for this phase towards the end of this presentation. And then following that, we'll have Phase 3, where we shift from working with the text of the code to strategic mapping updates focused on alignment of zoning, infrastructure, and planned investments. And so our infrastructure investment for this phase is underway. We plan to have a summary report by this fall, and we'll follow that with detailed community engagement to develop a rezoning proposal, primarily on how to use the new zoning districts that we're proposing tonight. And then looking ahead, thinking about kind of as we are rolling out new districts, as we are sort of testing out and seeing how production of middle scale housing works, we're also proposing a 2-year assessment of Phase 4 of how the new zoning districts are performing and bringing tweaks to them based on feedback from neighbors, builders, and other Metro departments. We anticipate that for 2028. In Phase 1, we kind of issued that very, very lengthy report in March. And kind of a broad look at our findings was that Nashville Next organizes growth around mixed-use centers and corridors with a mix of housing options to support choices for Nashvillians. We found that the current zoning code is out of date with a lot of different aspects of that. But at a broad level, one of the things that really highlights that is the heavy reliance in rezonings on specific plans and urban design overlays. We see these as specialized tools that are important for sites with unusual locations or that require further organization for development, such as establishing or reestablishing a street pattern, but that these are not the best tool to rely on for sort of routine construction of diverse housing types. We also found that the current code and map together make it difficult to construct smaller housing that uses land more efficiently, but also uses lower cost construction types. That's what I refer to throughout this as middle housing. The current code and map are also unlikely to accommodate the type or amount of housing that Nashville needs over the next 10 years. And then The code obviously does not yet incorporate a new state-enabled bonus for attainable housing, and that will be one of our recommendations as well. Over the past several months, through these two phases, we've had a variety of ways for community members to engage with us, to talk through with us, and to learn about and follow along the process. In phase one, we had multiple council and planning commission presentations. We had those 6 community conversations throughout the county. We also had multiple in-person and virtual office hour sessions after we released the initial findings, so that people who had, sort of taken their time to go through the report and kind of read through what we had put out, had the opportunity to talk through it with us, give us their feedback, ask questions, and better understand it. Throughout this time, we had a range of internal and external stakeholder meetings as well. Following phase one, we've had a number of work sessions with Planning Commission. We've had another round of countywide community meetings with 7 in person and 2 virtual workshops in May to review preliminary recommendations. We had additional in-person office hour sessions with practitioners to review the new draft districts, and then continued our internal and external stakeholder meetings. All of this from both phase one and phase two is documented and archived on our website with extensive background information and video explanations of each step in the process. So our goal is that anyone who wants to follow along with this process, whether you've been following along since January or whether you're just learning about it today, has the ability to sort of get fully caught up and understand all of the work that's gone into this so far. So the rest of the presentation tonight is on phase two, our draft recommendations memo, which is on our website. It includes an overall kind of our general approach to the project, key takeaways from engagement so far, recommended phase changes to the zoning and building code, introduction to the new zoning districts, and next steps. Our overarching goals for this memo and for this round of work is to improve the function and clarity of the zoning code for residential buildings, and to improve the compatibility between new construction and existing neighborhoods, to add incentives to the zoning code for including attainable homes within market rate buildings, and to create zoning options specifically scaled for middle housing, more closely aligned with Nashville's housing policy goals and Nashville Next framework for managing growth. As a reminder, when we talked with you in March, we laid out 4 tests that we will be reviewing any recommendation to ensure that they are supporting us in. The first is it supported by Nashville Next? The second is, will it support a housing market that provides better opportunities for Nashvillians? The third is, will it be supported by infrastructure, either what's existing today, what we are confident will be provided with new development, or where it's planned public improvements? And then fourth, will it result in the design and form of new construction that better matches its context, especially within or transitioning to neighborhoods? And so within the memo, we lay out a phased approach to changes to the zoning and building code in 3 pieces, task 2A, 2B, and 2C. Our goal in this is to sort of start with the changes that have the least impacts on people directly, that kind of add options to the zoning code without changing entitlements, and then to work our way through changes to form and character that we don't think substantially change entitlements, but affect a number of property owners. And then to end with a set of changes that taken together we think are a balanced approach to improving the form and function of our R and RS zoning districts. These touch a lot of property owners, but we think are a set of modest changes. Our goal is to sort of work through those in sequence so that people, if something is happening to your property, to the zoning that affects your property, you've got lots of lead time before that decision comes before you. So I'm going to go through these in detail, with the most detail in 2A, and then just a little bit of information on 2B and 2C as sort of future steps in this. I will note that there are some building code changes that are recommended as part of 2A that have already been folded in to the routine update to adopting the new International Building Code that's before you as BL 2025-898. As a reminder, most housing built in Nashville over the last 10 years has been larger lot single-family homes or dense multifamily in the urban core. Our preliminary findings, as well as the Unified Housing Strategy, suggested that middle housing was an important tool in delivering the kinds of housing that Nashvillians need, but is difficult to build in our current zoning code and zoning map. These are moderately scaled housing types, such as house courts, plex houses, and courtyard flats, that use land more efficiently than single-family homes, but have lower construction costs than taller apartment buildings. Because they're kind of in between those two, that's why we refer to them as middle housing or middle-scale housing. I'm going to talk through the structure of the new districts in a moment, but before I get to that, I just want to reiterate that while we are not yet to the point of making mapping recommendations, I do want to reiterate that our recommendations for where to apply these new zoning districts will be guided by Nashville Next, and in particular, the growth and preservation concept map and the transition and infill areas identified around centers and transit corridors. And so I've shown an example kind of zoomed in to a portion of that growth and preservation concept map to illustrate that. Our goal in this is to be strategic and careful, but also to find opportunities in later phases through community engagement, working with the public on where is most appropriate for these districts. The two new districts that we're proposing are drafted with help from national consultants that are bringing their expertise in how other communities have found design guidelines to help create broader agreement on managing the form of new construction. The language that we're using to name these districts mirrors how we talk about other districts in the code, such as office, mixed use, and commercial districts. And so what we've proposed is a residential neighborhood zone for house scale buildings, things like single-family homes and duplexes, but also house courts, plex houses, and manor houses. And then a residential limited zone that includes those, but also the larger forms, such as courtyard flats, multiplexes, and low-rise flats. Each one of these will also have slightly tweaked standards to reflect whether it is used in a suburban context or an urban context. And so the look and feel of these standards, I'm not going to go through these in detail, but I want to kind of convey what we'll be rolling out around the end of the month. Each one will have about 3 pages with all of the standards included within it. The first page is just a basic introduction. It will have graphic images of the scale of housing that's being proposed, as well as a text description. And then the next 2 pages are all of the standards kind of compiled and organized in a user-friendly way with graphical depictions of kind of what some of the different standards are and how they apply to properties. I know that's tough to see because it's 3 pages on one, so I'm going to zoom in to an example of the lot and building placement standards. This is for the residential neighborhood district. A couple of things I want to highlight. You'll see columns for RN1 and RN2. Those are the different standards for urban and suburban. And then in the graphic image on the right, you'll see portions labeled as A and B, C and E and F and G. These are to make it easy to understand what each of the dimensional standards, which each of the bulk requirements refers to on a given piece of property, to help understand what the lot size requirements are, what setback requirements are, what landscaping or buffer requirements are, that kind of thing. So the goal is that this is kind of keeps all of the standards more in one place, provides better cross-references to other parts of the code where we need to, and then tries to make it easy to understand how it applies to a particular piece of property. So this is the first part of kind of the set of standards we'll be bringing forward, the first out of 3. The second part is an update to the land use table. This is a simplified version of what's in the zoning code today. A simplified list of residential uses in the code are on the left-hand side in blue, and the current sets of zoning districts, RS for single family, R for 1 and 2 family, and RM for multifamily, are in blue. These are the current uses and the current zoning districts. And then what we have in green are the new districts, as well as a new list of building types that would show up as residential uses within the code. And so within these new building types, each one of these will show up where it's available within a district. RN you'll see as a shorter list because it's a smaller set of building types. RL has the longer list of building types. These show up as PC within the zoning code. That means permitted with conditions. And that brings me to the third part that we'll be bringing forward, which is the conditions that will be proposed to be added to the code for each one of these building types. These are the building type standards. And so again, we've got about a 3-page spread for each one. introduced with images to convey like what is the scale, what is the feel that we're going for, along with a text description. A page showing kind of examples of how the standards would be applied to particular property, for example, on a corner condition, on an interior lot condition, or when you have or don't have alley access. And then a third page showing kind of what the details, what the maximums or minimums are depending on the standard. So again, to zoom in, this is an example of for a house court on a lot without alley access. All of the kind of different letter codes on here are represented in the bulk standard table to show A and B would be the maximum main body footprint, kind of the maximum width, the maximum depth. Secondary wings, C and D, show the kind of the maximum width and depth of those. All of these are calibrated to be about the scale of these homes historically in Nashville, as well as to fit into the context, either transitioning into a neighborhood or alongside a neighborhood. And so that's like a very brief introduction to these new zoning districts. You'll see they're both, a little bit more prescriptive and a little bit more complex. That's what we think is needed to sort of direct the form and get the form outcomes that we think are important to this round of work. But they're also laid out in a much more easy to use format, a much more graphical format so that people understand, both neighbors and builders understand kind of what to expect from these. The other piece that we'll be bringing forward as part of this task 2A, this first round of changes to the zoning code, would be enabling the attainability bonus. And so I'm not going to spend as much time on this, but I do want to walk through some of the highlights and some of the work that we're doing to prepare for this. One, as a reminder, per state law, this applies only to rental housing. The state has not enabled us to do this for ownership options. It is structured as a bonus that is available on top of base entitlements. And so it's not something that we can apply to a builder who is only working within their base entitlements. The bonus could take a number of forms, such as height or bulk standards or density bonus. And it's likely to take the form of X change in entitlements for Y% of units at Z% of area median income, which is the affordability level. And so figuring out what X and Y and Z are is the work that we're doing with our consulting team to calibrate this. So the calibration is important. We want to understand kind of which standards are adjusted and how much so that we can maximize attainable unit production. And that's kind of walking a fine line between not setting the exchange so high that nothing is produced, but not setting it so low that we're leaving attainable units on the table. I do want to note that the percentage of attainable units when the bonus is used is likely to be modest. So if you bonus one story, we're unlikely to require that 50% of units in the structure be attainable. It might be 5 or 10 or 15%. The goal of this is to provide a mechanism for kind of allowing moderate amounts of attainability in lots of areas rather than concentrating a large number in one location. So that kind of task A is the first round of changes to the zoning code that we will prepare for you. Task 2B, and I'm going to go through the next two a little bit more quickly. 2B is to simplify and improve the design quality of commercial and multifamily districts. So there are a set of districts within the code that were first developed when the code was last comprehensively updated in the 1990s. We refer to these as the conventional standards or the conventional districts. There is a set of alternative standards that were added in the 2000s. These are denoted with the zoning on property with a -A. So RM20 is a conventional district, multifamily, 20 units per acre. RM20-A is the alternative standards for that same density. The two sets of standards have a number of things that they share in common, such as lot size and area, building coverage or impervious surface ratio, setbacks, and height. Where they differ, one of the critical elements is how they approach height. The conventional standards use a height control plane where you get greater height the deeper your lot is. That can often lead to unpredictable and unexpected outcomes. And so the alternative standards replace that with a maximum height at a build-to zone, like when you bring to the front of the property, and then with a step back. We'll be working to sort of refine that as well as part of this proposal. Broadly speaking, the conventional and the alternative standards were set up to be the same intensity. So we see this as improving the form primarily and not adding entitlements or reducing entitlements. The alternative standards also have a number of other elements that provide detail on floor to area ratio, the location and orientation of buildings, how you access the site, especially if an alley is available, a garage placement, that sort of thing. Most properties that are zoned, that have a zoning district that have both a conventional and an alternative version use the conventional district, about 16,000 acres, compared to about 1,500 acres that use the alternative districts. Only the mixed-use districts have a comparable coverage between the two. So typical commercial districts are overwhelmingly conventional. All right. And then the last round that touches the most properties is 2C for improving design quality and expanding areas for detached accessory dwelling units. And here it's a collection of small changes within the R and the RS districts. That is the R 1 and 2 family districts and RS single family only districts. And so here we would look at simplifying height measurements for residential buildings. There are several different standards for this within the code. We would look at, recommend simplifying conditions for duplexes within existing R districts. That's 1 and 2 family districts. These are permitted with conditions that can be extensive and difficult to assess. And so we would propose simplifying this. We think it affects a relatively small percentage of properties. And then we would recommend allowing detached accessory dwelling units within both R and RS districts throughout the USD. And then last, reducing heights in R and RS districts to improve compatibility within existing neighborhoods. I want to emphasize that each of these rounds will involve go through the typical process for making changes to the zoning code. We would also begin each round with additional opportunities for the public to absorb what our recommendations are, to give us feedback, and then begin the process for amending the zoning code. And so as a reminder, the new process at Planning Commission requires a public hearing, followed by a 1-month deferral to the vote by Planning Commission. With a recommendation from Planning Commission, it would go through 3 readings at Council, including a public hearing. And that's for each of those sets would go through this process. Then later in 2025, we would release our infrastructure assessment report and our proposed rezoning framework and begin working with council members and communities to identify appropriate locations for rezoning, primarily for those 2 new districts, RN and RL. That's why one of the reasons we've front-loaded this process with establishing those 2, so that once they are in the code, we can then begin community engagement while the other 2 rounds are ongoing. Thank you for your time this evening. I'm happy to take questions.
All right, thank you so much. We'll take questions. I saw Councilmember Benedict first, and then Councilmember Allen, and Councilmember Ellis, and Druffel, and Horton, and Evan Siegel. So we'll go in that order, starting with Councilmember Benedict.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Chair, and other Chair. And thank you to the members of the Planning Commission, or Department, rather. I have a few questions about this. First, on the Unified Housing Strategy that came out, I'm guessing that this is supportive of that plan. That plan, I just want to clarify, that came out then said that we need 90,000 new residential units in the city in the next 10 years. So breaking that down, that'd be 9,000 per year for the next 10 years if we could begin putting a shovel in the ground today, right? And based on 35 council districts, as if we could build equally among all 35, which we know we can't. I believe my math on that is 257 per council district per year for the next 10 years. I was doing some math and checked in with you, and it sounds like the net new number in District 7 was 70, and we're an urban suburban district. So I just wanted to kind of put it in those types of terms as far as the demand that we have and how these recommendations, I believe, will help us get there in a gentle way. I also did want to, on the growth and sustainability map, you mentioned the 1/8 of a mile in there. Yep. So mapped as 1/8 of a mile with that light shaded there, the light orange shade. I just want to confirm that 1/8 of a mile is 660 feet. a lot of our parcels are either 50 feet wide or 100 feet wide. So just understanding kind of going off of our major streets, we'd be talking about between 6 and 13 parcels in. So if you live 6 homes from the main street, you could expect some changes in those areas. Is that a fair assessment?
Yes.
Okay.
Broadly speaking.
And then, so the DADU thing in R and RS, I love it. That's awesome. I get that request frequently from single family that they'd like to add a DADU for, either affordable rentals or, family members. My question for you on the attainability side, I'm curious about on that affordable housing piece. You mentioned that the state law only allows for rentals only. I guess thinking about the market out there today for developers, I think mainly in the city, developers are building units and selling them more so than building them to, and maybe I'm looking at things wrong on this, but I'd be curious, do you think that we're creating a new market for developers to, and are there developers out there, do you know, in the market today that would be interested in using a model like what you guys are proposing on the attainability side, if that makes sense?
I think our expectation is that there are a lot of different developers with a lot of different kind of interests and motivations. I think a bonus that kind of keeps them whole, but allows them to provide some diversity of their unit type. Our understanding is that's something that some folks would use. It's not going to be for everyone. It's not going to be the model that everyone pursues. But we do believe that there's some interest in that.
Is that typically for something that's more of a larger, I'm going to make up numbers, 50 units plus, or is that something at 20 units and below kind of? And I know you can't dictate these things, but just so I can get my head around what that would look like a little bit.
So I guess I'll answer it this way. I think from other cities that we've seen with these kind of bonuses, the rental bonus tends to work a little bit better for larger buildings. And that's not necessarily 50 units or above. It could be 20, 30 units. But that on the smaller scale, it tends to work a little bit better in those cities where they do have the ability to do an ownership bonus. So at a Plex house scale, it's a little bit more workable to do it as an ownership bonus if that were available than, you kind of bonus up for one additional unit that's at a lower rent.
That's super helpful. Thank you. My last question is on the very last slide, you talked about the timeline for this. So it goes to the Planning Commission, and then there's a 1-month deferral that they have within their rules. They technically, in order to speed this timeline up, the Planning Commission could suspend their rules and go ahead and make a recommendation at that meeting with the hearing. Is that right?
Hi, thank you. They certainly could. I would say that we have found that time in between has been really helpful in dealing with other sort of complex text amendments to allow for the Planning Commission to hold the public hearing, hear from both proponents and opponents, also ask questions to allow staff to react in a thoughtful way with potential changes to the legislation so that they are not so that the Planning Commission is sort of not on the fly having to amend the regulations. And so they certainly can, although I think that as a body, they have found that time to be useful to allow for them to provide thoughtful counsel to you all on text amendments.
Appreciate that. And I think that's great. I just, as you can tell, I'm ready to get going on this. We need it based on the UHS demand that we saw. The longer we wait to get those 90,000 units online, the longer these things take, the less affordable we're going to continue to be. Chairs, thank you so much.
Thank you. Councilmember Allen, you're recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Appreciate the presentation and all the hard work that's gone on to this. I have 4 questions. First of all, I had a hard time finding a summary of this. I several times stumbled upon the schedule of meetings that had already happened. But I never could seem to get to, here's a navigation thing that leads me to this. Could we create a bunch of different links to get us there?
Absolutely.
Okay, I think that'd be really, because I wanted to direct people to it and I couldn't.
If I can answer real quick from our website, engage.nashville.gov/housing and infrastructure.
Right.
The reports tab will get you there.
You have to start with engage, and that never occurred to me to type in engage. So I kept typing in housing and infrastructure, and that didn't get me there. But there was a link that came through, to the council, so I did eventually find it. But if we could just make it more intuitive for non-professionals, that'd be really great. And then in some of the conversations that I've had with people, I have pointed to sort of the four-square size quadplex that exists, for example, on Belmont Boulevard, and the little two-story apartment buildings that are just sort of tucked in on the street, and they just kind of fit there. And I see those as examples of middle housing that don't, and those are working on just a regular street, not necessarily within an eighth of a mile of the corridors. Is that and I know that there are certain parts of town that don't welcome that possibility, but when I have explained it that way, they've kind of went, oh yeah, that's not that big a deal, if you only have one per block or, one per something or other. Is that part of this, or could it be, or should it be?
Sure. So what we're really sort of focusing on with this phase that we're in right now is we're focusing on the fundamentals of getting this tool set up, of getting these other amendments made to the zoning code, these adjustments to height, these adjustments to R and RS, so that we can then start having those conversations about appropriate places for mapping. And so it's a balanced approach. We need to look at, the amount of housing we need, where it's appropriate. And so it certainly could be that we do expand where it might be appropriate to place those, but that those conversations are sort of going to happen after we get this in place as a tool that can be utilized.
That makes sense.
Does that make sense?
It does. And then if we said this is a great place for our inn, which I think is what that would sort of fit under, would there be possible sort of spacing requirements inherent in that or possible in that? Because again, I don't think anybody would want to replace the entire street with two-story apartments. So kind of the dilemma we
There
talked
would not be, in the way that they are drafted now, anything that would say if you have one quadplex, you can't have another quadplex right next door to it. And I think that the idea is because they are house scale, and there's been a real focus on a house scale. And I happen to live on a street where there are, and in a middle housing type, where I have single family on either side, but then there's another quadplex. And so they really are able to even be beside each other on streets because the scale of them is appropriate. And so I don't know that we have focused necessarily on needing to distribute them in any way, because the thoughtfulness of the scale and the massing of them has really been put into the district.
All right, I appreciate that. And then as we talk about making it simpler to do duplexes, are we going to continue to keep our Nashville's unique definition of duplex, which can be two separate buildings? Or have we discussed changing that?
We have not discussed changing that.
Oh, maybe we could throw that in there as a question. Okay, and then my final question is, as we look towards enabling DADUs to be in more places, currently the DADU overlay specifically has a prohibition on using those as short-term rental. Would that then apply everywhere, or has it been, I see heads nodding. That has been discussed, I presume.
Mm-hmm. That is correct. We do anticipate recommending making that shift as well.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Allen. Councilmember Ellis. Oh, there you go.
And thank you all for for all this information. It's really good. So I'm going to go backwards and shorten my questions. Excuse me. For the infrastructure assessment report, going back to that growth and sustainability map, I wanted to understand like how far out that assessment will be, or will it just be within that 1/8 of a mile radius, the assessment that's done?
So the basis of the assessment that we're doing is going to be tied to different rezoning scenarios on different ways we can grow within the growth and preservation concept map. So that's kind of a saying, if we were to change the corridor from this zoning to that zoning, how many units do we think would be produced? Providing that to departments and having them sort of assess. Now, part of what that includes is not just any changes that we would make, It's also all of the existing zoning that exists. So while we're focusing on kind of the corridors and centers within Nashville Next, we are also sort of aware that there is existing zoning in the county that you can develop under today. And so we're going to take that into account as well. So our focus is alignment with Nashville Next, but we are recognizing that development that's off the corridors would happen, not through any proposal we're looking at, but because of existing zoning today.
Okay, so just to, it's going to take me a minute to absorb that, but to make it digestible for me, the current zoning codes that you all had, the old ones and the new ones, is it the older ones that, you know, are hypothetically zoned for these types of buildings? Will those be like, is that the areas that you're talking about that would be studied? So like if I want to go into my district and figure out if the infrastructure assessment report would cover this area, can I look at how is that current parcel zoned in order to determine that?
I think it might be better to talk through that one-on-one, just because I'm not 100% sure what you're asking. I mean, I think we'll be assessing kind of impacts countywide because development can happen under current zoning countywide.
Got it. I guess the answer that I was hoping for is that you all would be doing infrastructure assessment reports for the entire districts.
Will we be reporting them out by district?
Yeah. No, studying like the entire district.
Yeah.
What the infrastructure assessment is and reporting that out.
So I guess maybe an example might help.
Okay.
So as we work with the water department, we'll be able to say, like, generally along this corridor or in this area, we expect kind of these many units to be developed over the next 10 years. And so
Good.
they would
That's
be
what I
able to
wanted to
say, like, this trunk line has so much capacity. We think it's got plenty. It's ample capacity. This trunk line we think might be a little bit short and should be upgraded in their master plan. They won't be able to they probably won't go down to the level of this individual property has a 2-inch water line and it would not be able to support it. So it's kind of the big system decisions that they have to make. It's kind of that level.
So in theory, the same is true for when NDOT does their portion of the assessment.
Yes.
Okay, perfect. And you guys will be reporting that information out as well.
Now, I will say specifically for NDOT, some of this will feed into the multimodal mobility master plan.
Yeah, that's what I was assuming.
Okay.
Okay, so what sort of feedback have you all received from the community meetings that you've had? Just broad themes.
Broadly, I think there's a fair amount of division in the community. I think there's some folks who are very concerned about any changes near them. There's folks who are very concerned about their ability to afford a house, either their rent levels or their ability to purchase a house. There's a lot of skepticism of kind of broad brush changes throughout the entire county or throughout the entire USD. I think broadly, most people recognize the logic of the growth and preservation concept map of trying to, focus growth along our centers, along our corridors, and use that to sort of create complete communities. Again, not everybody loves that. There's still a fair amount of skepticism. But I think broadly, people, even if they don't love it, they recognize the logic of it. And so people have been willing to work with us.
Cool. And the last question is for that attainability bonus. So I want to understand if if the parcel would have to be rezoned or if it would go through the current rezoning process. Say if a developer were to come in and buy an RM parcel, would we have to go? Would it be written in the code to where it automatically changes over, or we still have the rezoning process that we have now?
So the logic of the bonus program would be that it's a bonus that you get under your existing zoning. And so it's, I think where we've been warned off from the state is tying the rezoning process to affordability requirements. That was what they preempted us from doing in 2017 with the inclusionary housing program. So here the logic is you've got your existing entitlements, say you can do a 3-story building. We can say, well, you can go up to 4 stories if you provide some percentage of affordable units. They don't have to do that. They can decide to just stay within 3 stories and skip the requirement. But if they want that 4th story, then that's what would trigger the attainability requirement. And that's, I think, the guidance that we've gotten. The structure of it is that's a bonus under your existing entitlements, not a further zone change.
That's right. It would simply be a review that happens at building permit phase. And so there would not be any additional sort of planning commission approvals or council approvals to utilize the bonus. It would just be something that's available and would be reviewed with building permits.
Perfect. Thank you, guys.
Thank you. Okay, we have Councilmember Druffel, Horton, and Evan Siegel in the queue, and I'm going with Councilmember Druffel.
Thanks, Chair. Relative to the DADUs, thanks for their presentation. Have you determined scaling by size of the DADU relative to, is it by the main part of the house or by the size of the lot?
I think we anticipate by the size of the lot, but that's all kind of where we're finalizing and trying to get to a final recommendation.
Just a follow-up question. You would, in essence, have a duplex. So is there an owner-occupied, like an Airbnb, where someone has to actually live in the house, or can they just start rebuilding them into be duplexes?
So I think we see it as distinct from duplexes because of the requirement that they be much smaller, whereas a duplex can both be kind of comparable in size.
But you could rent both of them out?
Mm-hmm. Yes. There is a requirement for common ownership in the current code.
Okay, because there's a big difference there. If I bring my grandmother in, that was one thing, to just start, as developers would probably do, is start building duplexes. And I just want to make sure I understand how that might be prevented.
Our current proposal does not have as drafted, the current proposal does not require sort of separate ownership of the 2 units. If you had a DADU or had a single family in a DADU, there's not a sort of separate allowance for ownership of the units. Is that what you're?
Well, it's just a matter of unless I own both units and I just start renting them out, one for a house and one for the DADU. So then I would, in essence, have, in de facto, sort of a duplex, right? And with 2 different types of people or groups doing, rented out. But it would allow for the redevelopment to do that. The question for us would be, how do you prevent that from happening? The soft ideas is a great idea because I can see it. But what will happen in real life, I don't think will be that soft version.
If I could interject a little bit here, I'm just wanting to get clarity on your question. So your question is, with expanding the DADU overlay in RS and R zoning outside of the urban district, would that then allow the owner of the primary residence to sell the DADU to another property owner?
No, sell the property, build a property that they wouldn't be living there. They're selling the property as a duplex, one larger house or facility as a DADU separately. So then really it's a new market for a different type of housing for developers.
Can you talk about how that works?
We can look into it.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you. Is that all, Councilman Druffel?
Yeah, thanks so much.
Thank you. Councilmember Horton, you're recognized. Here you go.
Thank you again for being here. I think this is a very informative presentation. I'm particularly excited by the new potential zoning districts, which I think can provide a very helpful missing middle option for people. One aspect I would like to revisit briefly is the wisdom of imposing minimum lot areas on the new zoning district. It seems intuitively, my thought would be like, we want to provide the greatest degree of flexibility for communities to fit or not fit these zoning districts wherever it makes the most sense for them, particularly in urban neighborhoods with small lots. So my question is, what's the policy objective we're pursuing with minimum lot areas? And is there any way to achieve that in a way that doesn't decrease our flexibility in using these on small lots?
That is something we're thinking through as we refine and finalize the standards. I think generally we want to make sure that we are providing clear guidance for what essentially would be buildable for not just kind of an individual unit, but as the units get larger, as kind of parking, where parking is required, where that's available, kind of where you have driveway access requirements, that sort of thing. But we're happy, like as we roll those out, we're happy to continue the conversation. But we are definitely thinking of kind of what is the option to use these in situations where you do have small lots, and trying to tailor to, in particular, kind of what the typical lot sizes are, especially in our urban contexts.
Councilmember Hord?
That was it. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you. And Councilmember Evan Siegel, you're recognized.
Thank you, Chair. Hopefully I'm not asking something somebody else has asked. I think these are all different, but coming at the end, I may have missed it. I think while we're on detached accessory dwelling units, I think there are a lot of detached accessory buildings, some of which may not be technically dwelling units that have been built that have a bunch of old restrictive covenants on them. Are we looking at a process to kind of clean that up so that those buildings now would just fall in the scheme? Because I know a lot of those do actually have really explicit rental requirements that if we're allowing dadoos everywhere, and say, I know there are a bunch in D6, so not to single out the council member behind me, but like if we're allowing one neighbor to build a dadoo and somebody has a long-standing building but a restrictive covenant, are we going to allow them to address that restrictive covenant?
I think we would probably need to have conversations with Metro Legal about what that looks like. If a lot is made where they can have a dadu legally, and there's already, say, an accessory structure that was built with a covenant that said this is not living space, and it fits within the standards of sort of square footage and those sorts of things that are outlined in the proposed text amendment, then I think that that's probably an easy answer of, well, yes, now it's legal and it's within the code. I think that where we might get into sort of issues is if someone built something that was sort of bigger than what the code will permit for dadoos, then we may not be able to say, well, you're legal now, because it might be outside of the allowances of what we're permitting. Does that make sense? If someone built I'm just using this as a number. If someone built a 1,200 square foot accessory building, but the dadoos are limited to, say, 800 square feet, then although that lot may now be permitted to have a dadu, what they've built is larger than the code permits. And so then in that case, it may not be able to be made legal.
Do we have any idea how many are that big? I would be shocked if it are a ton, but
I don't.
we don't have any like tracker of those ones. Okay. I think another question we talked about, what is a duplex? Also, I may be wrong, so please definitely correct me if I am. I think we define a townhome as a building separated effectively by firewalls up and down from the building next to it. We sort of think of them as linear, but the way they're defined today, you can actually have back-to-back townhomes as well. And I think that's really helpful, especially when you look at older lots. We don't really have this product online here in the Middle Tennessee area today, but I know like out in Denver and some other places that have similar lot sizes, they have back-to-back townhomes that some people might call a quadplex, but really are townhomes because they're fully separated units by the firewalls. And so I just want to ask how are we looking at the definition of townhome today relative to what can fit on a lot? Because sometimes you might not be able to put 6 across, but you can do 4 together as long as they're townhome structures.
I'm gonna let Greg take most of this, but I will say that right now in our zoning code, there is not a definition for townhome, right? And so we're sort of adding those, and so we can we're adding a whole lot of new definitions right now. There are attached single family in the code, but that's a very specific type of thing because those have to be on a platted lot. And so those can be sort of zero lot line if we think about it. And those are defined, but otherwise they're not. And so I think that we are trying to have the definitions and the standards be flexible.
I think that would, I think within, so one of the things that the testing that we're doing now and working with practitioners to try to get an understanding of is like, what would people seek to do with these? How do they relate to current buildings? What could you do? Like, how do they, what do they allow you to do within the current standards? And so one of the things that we found is sort of, and you know, to Councilmember Benedict's point, or sorry, Councilmember Allen's point earlier about sort of some of the existing examples that we have in Nashville today, we've been going through and testing those against the standards. And so some things that I had thought, you know, when I started testing were going to be one building type, it turned out they, you know, missed one of the standards. They were too big on one dimension or something for that, but it turned out they met a different building type. So that's one of the things that we're exploring right now to understand, like, how do they fit together? And so we're mindful that some of the building types that, you know, we may call it a plex house, but if you add a couple doors in the right places, that's the kind of configuration that you're talking about. And so that's one of the things we're trying to think through, kind of where do these produce the right scale, but give developers or builders the flexibility to create, you know, something that winds up being more of an ownership type, or, you know, that fits an unusual building or lot condition, that sort of thing. And that's why sort of the testing that we're going through now is critical to get us a better understanding of how does it work in practice. There's, I think, an ability also, like, as we settle into these, as we sort of see what's built over the next 2 years, if there's something that we think is a critical element that other cities have had good success with but is being blocked, it may be a tweak of the standards, or it could be adding another building type.
And I guess sort of on a related note, a lot of these are new building types for this market. They're not, we might have historic versions. There may be a developer here or there testing them out and getting specific zoning, but like these are all pretty new building types. And I think one thing, we certainly have local builders who will develop unique plans, but a lot of times that cost engineering is one of the heaviest burdens to getting a product off the ground. And so I know there was a resolution for plans, but I'm also curious sort of what research are we doing into other markets so we know, like, where are there off the shelf plans, and are we making sure that those exist before we put these out there? Because if all of these have to be designed, drawn, and cost engineered, it for a 4 or 6 unit building, that's cost prohibitive.
So yes, to speak to the resolution related to the pattern book, we did sort of work with Councilmember Horton to put that on pause because we didn't want to spend time or money coming up with plans for districts that exist now when we knew that we were working on new districts, right? And so we wanted to sort of make sure that we're focusing the effort. We still need to look at what that looks like moving forward. We weren't funded to do that work, and so we have to look at what that looks like in regards to how we can move it forward, given sort of constraints with funding. But also, we do know, I mean, these are working with sort of a national team on this. There are a lot of other communities that they have worked in as well where there are examples of these types of buildings that have been successfully implemented. And so we're sort of not reinventing anything that's not seen across the country in a lot of ways, even with new construction.
I'll also add, I think my expectation would be that, you know, it's going to start slowly. It's going to be builders sort of figuring out what works, figuring out what plans comply, figuring out the ins and outs of it. But as they get their feet under them, it makes it easier and easier to sort of learn by doing, to get the experience, figure out what plans work. And so I think it's something that sort of picks up steam over time. And we've seen that in other communities that have done this kind of reform.
All right, thanks. I appreciate that. I guess I would just add, like, as a little bit of color and commentary, we're not a market where people typically experiment with housing types because we're a very expensive market to build in for a lot of reasons, rock, hills, water, things that you might not have in, say, Arizona. So it is going to be harder, I think, to experiment if these aren't things where we can say, well, these cities have done them, and so you should look and talk to people who've done it here to get over that initial cost burden. And then sort of my last bit of questioning for today on the state law, and it's been a minute since I've read it, so I'm sorry if these are really obvious questions. Is it that the whole project has to be rental or only the affordable unit? Or units?
I think that is a nuance that I have not gotten into, and so I would want to follow up, check with legal and get back to you on that.
Okay, and the reason I ask is because there are federal lending programs that allow an owner occupier to essentially get what we think of as a conventional mortgage, federally backed mortgage through Fannie Mae for up to 4 units. So if there's a way to do a hybrid in there on the smaller scale, it can be owner occupied finance and have a rental, and that rental counts toward the income requirement for those loans. And so making sure we're thinking about creative ways, not just where you can have bigger buildings that are for investors, but ways that people can actually build their own wealth and have smaller scale buildings, I think would be helpful.
I think that's good, and there's probably some legal nuance to the state law that we need to look into. I think it also would benefit us to sort of talk to some lenders to sort of understand what kind of restrictions. Because I live in a building like this, I know that we actually have, for our 5 units, there's only 1 unit can be rented. Of the 5, and a lot of that has to do with lending or the types of financing that individuals in the building can get, because there's some requirements when you're sort of looking holistically. And so I know that there are some other restrictions, or it makes it sort of more complex.
Yeah, certainly. And also, especially if somebody say, like, you can't just do it through FHA, like it has to be somebody who can qualify for a conventional mortgage and have the down payment, which is always a hurdle. But I think I can think of at least one city, and there may be more, who on attainable bonuses has had success, even at smaller scale, say you can do 6 units instead of 4 if one of them is attainable. That obviously wouldn't qualify, but a scenario where maybe you could go from 2 to 4 or 3 to 4 if it is attainable can then still qualify for that conventional owner-occupied mortgage, as long as somebody can live there and own it, that non-affordable unit.
Thank you. All right, we'll go to Council Vice Chair Rutherford and then Chair Parker, and then I have questions, and then we'll go back around to anyone else that has questions. So Vice Chair Rutherford, you're recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I too want to say thank you for all the work that's gone into this. And my first question was asked and answered, and it regarded the community engagement, and I appreciate everything that you have done on that too, because I know that was a heavy lift as well for the department. But my second question is in relation to the state. I've heard the state mentioned 2 or 3 times now, and but more simply put, is there any concern about the state on the back end of this in terms of wanting to change anything in relation to zoning or potentially preempt on the back end more than what we've talked about now, but in future legislative sessions? Is that something to be concerned about?
On the attainability bonus specifically?
On the attainability bonus, or really the overall picture in general? Because I know it was referenced in terms of the state, in terms of what's currently allowed, what's currently preempted. are we concerned going forward as to any future changes that may take place? Maybe potentially legislation last year that was held over. Is there anything to look at there, or any talk of anything coming in the future for us to be concerned about in relation to all of this?
So I don't know that, none of us really have a crystal ball in regards to what we might be facing. I will say that we are when it comes to planning and zoning, allowed to do that which the state gives us the power to do. And so that sort of is always the case. It is not unusual that we have to react to changes in the law in regards to planning or zoning or subdivision regulations and how we effectuate the work that we do within those boundaries. And so I think that we are operating under what is allowed now, and moving forward just sort of in good faith with that.
Thank you. Chair Rutherford, you're recognized. I'm sorry. Chair Parker, you're recognized.
Thank you, Chair Gamble. Yeah, so thank you all for the presentation. That's super interesting. I can't wait to get the kind of detailed document that shows the RN and RL, all the specs of that. The one thing that did jump out at me was, I think it was the RL. There's either a 5,000 or a 6,000 square foot minimum lot requirement, depending on if it's the suburban or urban. If I remember correctly, that was the RL. And that is going to be really great. I mean, as Councilmember Horton said, you know, maybe there's something to be said for looking at other options for smaller lots, odd lots, but specifically like in frequent cases, and Lisa, we've talked about this a number of times, where we've got a 7,500 square foot corner lot in, you know, District 5 or a similar area, and the policy, neighborhood evolving, but there's really not a zoning district that allows you to get like a reasonable amount of units on that corner lot, because it's like you would have to do RM 40, but neighborhood evolving doesn't support RM 40, or it's not big enough for 15, which for some reason the lots have to be. So anyway, very excited to have some options on the menu that will kind of close that gap of what seems like a not super well thought out thing whenever that was put in place back in the day. So thank you all for that. The one question, on the big picture with the different housing types, it was townhome, and you know, it's kind of the zero lot line. It was the previous one, the yellow that I was thinking of. Yes. So in RN there, we've got townhouse, and to me that looks like a zero lot line build. And I'm a huge fan of zero lot line builds. I've lived in 2 of them in Nashville now. And I know that there are probably not areas in the county where like planning is going to say, yeah, let's slice this up into 25-foot lots. Like for whatever reason, I just don't see that as a direction that we're heading in the planning profession. But there are a lot of areas like Highland Heights, for example, that the underlying lot lines are 25 foot today. So what you'll see a lot of people do is they'll take a home or buy a couple of homes together, and they'll knock down the houses, revert to the underlying 25-foot lot lines, and we get kind of a nice 2-story shotgun type long product. But I wonder, do y'all envision, you know, new construction zero lot lines, you know, where the lots make sense for that to happen? Like, do you envision that being feasible with RN or RL moving forward?
So what I would say is that there are already some allowances in the code right now in regards to attached single family is the frame, which is sort of exactly what you're describing. It allows for smaller lot sizes. So there is already some allowance. I think that we have seen some movement away from that in favor of detached units just as a form, even when they're on those narrow lots. But yes, I mean, we're trying to provide lots of opportunity for lots of different things, although there is already sort of currently some opportunity that we have not seen utilized frequently for attached single family.
And I would add, one of the reviews that we're doing as we calibrate the standard is where those options that aren't used right now, where they might be enabled by these new types. So thinking of how they work together.
Great. So just for those who don't know, like a zero lot line it might be an attached duplex or a row of townhomes, but each lot and each home is individually owned. So doesn't have to be an HOA. There's not sort of this question of like, can I put a shed on this common space? Or you own the lot, and it's a lot of flexibility, but it's like a very efficient, can be a very efficient use of land. So very interested to see if that's enabled more by some of this stuff that we're doing. And I think largely my other questions were addressed. I did have one on the attainability bonus, and it's more of a comment than a question, and that is, if we're likely to not yield, a high percentage of units, I would encourage us to really push on the AMI that we're locking in with these units. So, 60 and below, I have at the 80% to 120, I don't know that, all I'm going to say is that I think it would be better for us to push for the lower AMI units if we can make that pencil out for folks in a way that they're actually going to utilize the program, even if it's fewer units overall. And then lastly, y'all mentioned the M3, the multimodal mobility master plan. And I know we don't have anybody from NDOT here today to speak to it, but do y'all have a sense of when we're going to see a draft of the M3 plan? Oh, okay. We don't. I can reach out to.
I don't have the answer to that.
I can reach out to
I have an
Curtis.
idea, but I don't want to get it wrong.
I'll reach out to
So,
them.
yeah.
Thank you. Thank you. That's all I had.
Thank you, Chair. I just want to echo what's already been said, appreciation of the work that you all have done on this study, and then coming up with the recommendations, the community engagement. I attended several of those sessions and really value the attendance at those sessions as well as the feedback that we got from the community. So appreciate it that you've incorporated that in these recommendations. I'm really excited about the expansion of the Dadu overlay. That's something that I've been talking about with residents in District 3 for over 2 years. A lot of interest in it, and appreciate that by expanding it, there would be the regulations and restrictions that we currently have that would allow more homeowners to benefit or take advantage of that opportunity. My questions revolve around the implementation of the new zoning districts. You mentioned that these new districts would be amendments to the code, and I guess my question is, the process through the planning department or planning commission, would these new districts be rolled out as one title amendment or recommendation, Title 17 change amendment, or would they be 3 separate ones? And what is the time frame for introducing them?
So I think our expectation would be that the new districts would all go as one, because they've got to work together. They wouldn't really work kind of piecemeal that way. Our goal is to have them ready for public review by the end of the month, but we're kind of, like I described, a number of things that we're doing to sort of test and make sure that they're well calibrated. But we know that there is an eagerness to move them forward. We're trying to balance that with making sure that they are vetted pretty robustly, both so people know what to expect if they are proposed to be used near them, but also to make sure that builders, Councilmember Evan Segal comment earlier, that builders have an expectation of what they'll be able to do, and that we're not sort of have a standard that for one reason or another prohibits it from being used.
Great, thank you. And then my second final question has to do with the process after the Planning Commission reviews and approves or disapproves the new zoning districts, and it goes, well, we'll assume they all approve. We'll assume that the commission approves them, and then it goes to the council process. And I think Councilmember Ellis kind of alluded to this, but would it be where we would still need the council member to initiate a rezoning of the parcels close to the corridor that you're recommending for the new zoning district, or will that come through as a countywide text amendment as well on the council side, where we are amending to add these new zoning districts to the areas near the corridor that you've identified?
Sure. So is that okay? Is that on?
Yeah, no, you had to push the button.
Oh, there we go. Oh, sorry. I turned it off. I think a couple of different things. So this first or this second phase, phase 2, focusing on these text amendments to create the new districts, modify the RNRS, look at the DADUs, all of that. Once that gets done, then we would start sort of work on identifying appropriate locations for rezoning. That said, once the districts have been adopted, if individual council members want to look at their own districts for potential application of those districts or rezonings to those districts, that is an option. We will be looking and working with the community and the council and looking at where infrastructure is available, looking at balancing sort of a lot of goals of environmental protection, infrastructure availability, the need for housing, community conversations to balance what our recommendation might be in regards to the mapping. But once they're adopted, individual council members could then utilize those in their own district.
Okay, great. That answers my question. Were there any other questions? Okay. We'll go to Cash since he has an answer. Ask one and then Ellis. Councilmember Cash, you're recognized.
Thank you, Chair. And I kind of just want to go back to Councilmember Druffel's question because I was confused about it a little bit. But I guess I want to clarify. Like, I'm not asking about like legally subdividing the lot so there are two owners. But right now, for a DADU, a property that a DADU goes on, there's one owner, but they can't rent both. Like, they have to be on at least in one, if not the main unit, at least in one of the units. And you're not suggesting changing that, right? Where it can like like a backdoor subdivision where both can be rented to separate tenants.
So we're not proposing to change the ownership requirements that exist in the code today.
Can I?
Meaning that the owner needs to live on the property.
I would want to look at the code to see what the exact wording is, but we
Fair.
are not proposing to change how it is done today.
Fair.
But I just am not certain of what the exact language in the code is. And so
I wonder if
I
that's
don't
what
want
he was
to, I don't want to sort of affirmatively assert something without looking at what the language of the code is.
I got
But
you.
we're not proposing to change that.
That's what I'm asking. Thank you.
And I wonder if legal or someone could, Director Darby can weigh in, because currently today, a property owner who owns a property can rent out their primary residence regardless of the zoning. Is that correct? Oh, I'm sorry. Let you put on something. There you go.
Yes, that's something that's within their authority to rent out their private residence. There are some, for everything, there's probably some limitation on that, kind of going back to lending requirements. And I know that certain low-income housing, you may be able to own it because you were able to use some sort of funding, some sort of, lending that allowed you to purchase that based on your income, but you wouldn't be able to rent that out.
So I guess, and I don't know if I'm correct in your question, Councilmember Cash, but I get, if you're asking if with the DADU overlay, would somehow that expand ability of a primary owner, property owner to rent out not only the DADU, but their primary residence? And it sounds like this DADU overlay does not change or consider or add that availability, but it's already available today to any property owner who wanted to rent out their property.
I'm sorry, you lost me a little bit.
Oh. Okay. We'll hear from Matthew Wilkinson.
Hi, Matt Wilkinson in the council office. The current requirement for a DADU, it requires that the detached accessory dwelling be owned by the same person as the principal structure and that one of the two dwellings shall be owner occupied. So therefore, if you were to build a DADU, you gotta live in one of the units. You can't just build a DADU onto the backside and then rent out both units. It's similar to the owner occupancy requirement for STR.
Right. That was my understanding, and I'm just understanding that there's no proposal to change that.
Okay, thank you. Councilmember Ellis.
That was a really good exercise because I actually have a property owner in my district right now that has a long-term rental unit, and he already has a zoning for a dadu in the back that he's currently building. And so I hope he doesn't plan to have that as well as a long-term rental. But anyway, always new information to learn. The question that I had, and admittedly, I need to go back and watch some of the previous meetings that was held. But the one thing that I'm trying to understand and make sure is that with these new zoning districts, assuming that they all pass, any existing zoning codes that are applicable to the new zoning districts, those won't auto change. Will they?
Sorry, let me ask for clarification. Are you talking about the RN and RL districts that we're creating?
Yes.
Okay, so the first step is just creating those districts.
Yes.
And they would have all of their own standards. So they're not replacing any districts. They are out of whole cloth new districts.
Perfect. Okay, cool.
Yeah.
Yes.
So RM districts will still exist, RRS will still exist. These are just brand new districts that will have their own standards.
Got it. Okay, great. Thank you.
All right. Any further discussion? Great. Thank you again for being here. We'll wrap up now with just a little over an hour for this meeting. And this is the PowerPoint available anywhere? We did get the recommendation summary in an email from, I believe it was Director Kemp, someone it came from. But this PowerPoint, I don't think was included.
We'll post the PowerPoint to the website along with a link to the video.
Great. Thank you. With that, we are adjourned. Thank you.
This has been a service of the Metro Nashville Network. If you would like to see this presentation again, or for more information on this and other programs, visit nashville.gov.